And welcome. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of Career Coaching After Hours. It's your host, John Davidson. And here we are. I can hardly believe it's the end of September 2024. And this time we're going to be talking about the wild, weird, and wonky job market of 2024. And I hope you like my thumbnail image. Microsoft Designer and I had a fun time coming up with some entertaining images. And so I had a whole host of ideas for my YouTube episode here this month. Boeing, of course, still on strike, Amazon returning to work, lots of really big ticket topics in the news, amongst other issues like the economy, of course, and inflation, and Fed rate cuts and the job market. But what I want to do is dig a little bit deeper into some of what we've been seeing out there in the mass media, whether that's CNN or TechCrunch or a few other outlets, and I'll have some links up in the description. So again, thank you for joining me on this episode. I kind of stopped in my tracks. We're just about here at Q4 based on the calendar month, and I thought we might just do a reality check or a sanity check. Again, this series is audience agnostic, and I may in fact not be your career coach whatsoever. I am a career coach, a career counselor, a career architect, a resume writer. I get called all kinds of things. But in a way, this series is also an opportunity for me to mediate the facts and kind of meditate on what I see out there. So I hope you find this useful, and I appreciate you joining me. So, as usual, check your sources. Feel free to take a look at my credentials, and feel free to follow up on some of the links and the citations that I make, and make your own decisions and your own conclusions. So, I'll scoot right on along and ask the question, what in the world is going on in 2024? I think we're still in 2024, last I checked, and like I say, we've only got a few months left. So, unless you're one of those companies like Microsoft that doesn't follow the calendar quarter system, we just have a few months left in this wild, rocky, weird nanners year that we've been in. So yes, strange issues popping up left and right. It's an election year to top everything off, but I work with a diverse range of humans. So I work with data scientists and aerospace engineers and teachers and lawyers and doctors and all kinds of different folks. And a lot of sectors of the job market seem a little bit odd. And we've certainly seen some strange data and some revisions coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And now what I've been seeing the last couple weeks, probably like you folks, is some mass media reports and mainstream media reports about consumer confidence fizzling, or maybe a general worry that some of these tech layoffs for 2023, 2024 might be more permanent because of AI, or maybe there's a changing tech landscape and we'll never go back to 2023. So really interesting topics, and I cited to some of these articles last episode, but of course there have been some interesting kind of technical errors, vanishing jobs or glitches, and so I think a lot of us are kind of looking at BLS or Bureau of Labor Statistics job stats with a little bit more of a cautious eye, as in, is unemployment really as low as we think it is? So are there some vanishing jobs? Or maybe is some of the data from 2024 earlier this year maybe corrupted and maybe not quite as rosy as we thought? Sure looks that way. So I'll dig in here a little bit more. And of course, if CNN says Americans are fretting over the job market, then I suppose my learned opinion should probably be that Americans are fretting over the job market. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But kind of an interesting piece that I pulled out here in this article. So you could say from a glance, is the job market in decent shape? Maybe, but it seems to be flagging or fizzling a little bit. And so one of the things we're seeing here, July, August, maybe some concerns about fewer job openings. So fewer job openings, fewer jobs being created, potentially a perfect storm if also we see kind of high unemployment rates there. And so really interesting point there. What are employers doing? Are a lot of employers kind of waiting to see what happens with maybe the election, or maybe with the Fed cutting rates, and where we'll go there? So interesting point there. I think that article is worth taking a look at. And again, maybe a good reminder that we shouldn't just look at unemployment rates exclusively. And also, don't be afraid to dig a little bit deeper. So folks like me who live in Washington State, take a look at your locality and your jurisdiction. What do those stats look like? Here's another interesting article I saw, Business Insider. I think generally pretty believable. Job market is reaching a turning point. Probably is. Steeper rate cuts to follow. And so I think this is kind of interesting, as in, the job market can have dramatic effects on Wall Street and vice versa. And what I'm seeing is some hesitation out there among some hiring managers. I saw a trusted recruiter here in the Seattle area do a really interesting post on LinkedIn pointing out that you probably, if you're a hiring manager, you still don't want to wait for talent. A lot of hiring managers kind of playing it cool and waiting to see what happens. And so maybe not sure if they should snap up some talent now, or maybe wait until 2025, till maybe budgets freshen up. And so I think this recruiter made a good point that, it's still a competitive job market. If you really do want that top employee, you might not want to wait. Even though you could say it's a market where you have a little bit more choice if you're a hiring manager. And certainly we're seeing that. Triple-digit applications and LinkedIn Premium for jobs becoming much more common, and those kind of things. So some other interesting data points to take a look at. Another article here, Inc. What I like about this article is it discusses a recent Wall Street Journal article, but it's not paywalled, which is kind of nice. But again, getting back to this concept that maybe we really are in completely different waters, and that some of these job cuts that we're seeing, especially in the tech sector, programmers, data scientists, project managers, what have you, whether that's in the video game sector or big tech companies like Apple, Microsoft, are they ever going to come back? Perhaps because of some of the big investments in AI, employers might want to make good on that. But even companies like Intel, the big chip maker, of course, major layoffs. So I think this is actually kind of interesting. You see some data here. So across the board, where tech may be bouncing back more slowly than we thought. And 2024, we seem to be seeing some larger cuts than expected. And so I'll point out some data here. If you know me, I certainly like to cite to GeekWire once in a while. Of course, they're based here in the Seattle area. But they have a layoff tracker in addition to TechCrunch and some of the other sources like Levels FYI. But I thought this was really interesting, looking at, and I just pulled this here today, some layoffs across 2024, but then ironically in this ranking, we don't see 220 employees laid off by Bungie, based over in Bellevue, which I thought was a little strange. It didn't quite make the list, being that that's a fairly sizable layoff here in the Pacific Northwest. So kind of interesting. But we do see some bigger layoffs there. Of course, you see Microsoft on the list, among some other big ones. And if we look at some of the macro stats here too, which I think is really helpful, I certainly have clients across the country, mostly here on the West Coast. But if we take a look at TechCrunch, I think great resource to dig into once in a while. So even in 2024, after 2022 and 23, 60,000 job cuts across 250 plus companies. Tesla, Amazon, Google, TikTok, Snap, and of course Microsoft here in the Puget Sound area. And so I think helpful to be somewhat aware of this, and that so even if you don't want to work for these types of firms, does that have ripple effects on the larger economy? Or maybe this malaise that we're seeing among hiring managers? I would say yes, it does, is what I'm seeing, generally speaking. And so I get asked by clients all the time, what's the tech market like? What's the job market like? What's the Seattle or Western Washington or the Washington State or the PN dub market look like? And typically I have to say, it depends. Keep an eye on kind of the macro and the micro. And maybe don't get too worried about what's going on. Focus more on your own career search. And I'll talk about some advice here. But I thought this was a really interesting article. It's somewhat out of the blue, but here's CNBC, but they cite to another article with a kind of a similar type headline, but this kind of broader question about immigration. And are immigrants taking jobs from native U.S. workers? And they dig into what some experts say, and essentially, no. The consensus is that is very strong. There are not significant costs to U.S.-born workers from immigration, at least the type of immigration we've historically had in the U.S. So I think a telling quote, but maybe interesting that CNBC would feel the need to write that because of that potential concern. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting. But that article is cited in my notes there as well, so feel free to take a look at that. But like I say, I thought maybe a bit of a dive into some of what we're seeing out there. Of course, like I say, so often here on the West Coast, we look to what is Boeing doing? What is Amazon doing? What is Microsoft doing? Some of these massive employers, very important to the economy across the West Coast. Or when you have Microsoft or Boeing so tied into federal infrastructure, what have you. They have national security ramifications for just the size and the scope of some of these big employers. But to kind of maybe put some of this into context, and again, maybe sometimes even the experts aren't quite 100% sure what is going on. So a couple of advice points here that I'll throw out. Again, as I mentioned, yes, we're in an election year, and I've coached folks through election years before, but I think also taking into consideration the fact that Q4 is coming up. And so the fourth quarter, oftentimes we see a boost in, for example, retail employment. So many times I've elbowed folks to consider employment for the holiday season, for example. Gearing up for Black Friday, what have you, as a temporary or as a stopgap opportunity, or even in the travel industry, in other sectors where seasonal hiring may be part of the discussion. And I think it's worth noting that there is this concept of the September surge, or what I call the Q4 scramble, as in this concept that hiring managers and human resources professionals, recruiters, may feel a little bit of additional pressure to get headcount squared away by the end of the year before we start Q1 2025. And so maybe to be aware of organizations or employers, public or private, that might have those dollars to spend. And sometimes maybe digging a little bit deeper into not just job boards, but organizational specific job boards, or maybe even digging in a little bit into LinkedIn to see what recruiters are talking about, and kind of going beyond the Indeeds and the Monster.com data that's out there. A couple of other points, very briefly. One thing I'm certainly seeing is, for example, in LinkedIn Premium, jobs that are getting released and a day or two or three later, they're in the triple digits. Lots of folks applying to a job, and that may or may not be dispositive whether it's an easy apply situation. So if you know someone who has LinkedIn Premium, or if you're thinking about trying it, you might want to consider that free trial to see some of that deeper data that might not be provided on an organization's website, on their actual job board. So maybe respond to that job on day 1. Maybe don't wait for day 2 or day 3. Is have that sense of urgency and be that early bird. Another interesting topic that I sometimes get into with clients is a test as far as usajobs.gov, which is the clearinghouse website that the federal government uses. And what I've been seeing is that the jobs that are tagged to public and remote, which is kind of interesting. So this would be jobs that individuals who are outside of the federal government could apply to, or non-veterans, is some of these jobs are getting snapped up quite quickly. And so I'll see a job posted and a day or two later it's gone. It's been filled up. And so I'm seeing a little bit more of that, which would suggest a little bit more tenacity in the job market. So something to consider whether you're considering working for the feds or not. One of my favorite catchphrases is, don't forget the feds. Partly as a reminder that there are jobs outside of the Fortune 500 or the private sector. Certainly lots of wonderful jobs in the public sector, nonprofits, NGOs, the government, what have you. So as I say, eek. And I'll throw out this concept of stickiness of applications, this idea of following up. So for example, if you get that email thanking you for that application, maybe emailing back and saying thank you for acknowledging that, or triple checking that you're following up after those interviews with a thank you note or with an email or a card of some kind at an even higher level than maybe before, with that, like I say, with that tenacity in the job market. So a few things to keep in mind as far as what I see. And so I can only work with so many individuals, but as far as what I see at a macro level in the press and what I'm seeing out there in the trenches, in the street, and in terms of what my clients are dealing with, it seems there's some tenacity in the market and some genuine concern and some real question marks. So best of luck to you if you're in career search mode. And I might suggest that if you're in a hiring position, if you're a hiring manager or a human resources professional, or maybe a recruiter, or all of the above, or some of the above, that maybe a little bit of additional empathy for those job seekers, a little bit more kindness in consideration of what in the world is going on out there. So, as usual, thank you for joining me. I'm going to keep this one very short, but absolutely feel free to sound off in the comments. What do you think? Am I on target or am I way off base? Feel free to message me directly. And although I did have a lot of fun, here's some extra credit. I do have to say thank you, Microsoft Designer, for helping me with the image there, and the thumbnail at the top of our presentation. But I thought it was really interesting that when I was trying to prompt engineer some images, I was typing in themes like wild job market, or some themes around how unsure job seekers are, how difficult job interviews are, as so many folks are having to go through 4 or 5 interviews in their cycle, or 6 or 7 on layers to their job interviews. And so these are the ones I thought were kind of safe enough to share, but a little bit completely nanners. And I think you could say some of these themes and some of the imagery is just maybe indicative of, in fact, how weird and wild it is out there. So even though they have a little bit of a fever dream pitch to them. Whew. But I think we're safe from AI, or maybe we're not. And there we be. So again, here's some of the sources that I typically cite. I'll put the actual citations out in the YouTube channel notes. And if you'd like any of them emailed to you directly, feel free to fire off an email, firstname@firstlastname.com, John@johndavidson.com. johndavidson.com is great. Or if you want to check out Architect Infinity or Olympic Resume, that'd be great too. Or john@olympicresume.com. And again, thank you so much, Ghost Rifter, for the tunes. Appreciate it. Definitely feel free to support Ghost Rifter. And again, thank you, clients, viewers, supporters, students, all of you. I appreciate it. If you have ideas for future episodes, please let me know. Seems like I'm never at a loss. And thank you, Canva and Microsoft Designer, Grammarly, and PowerPoint, because without all these wild and crazy tech tools, where would I be? All right, I'm John Davidson, signing off. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.